Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our pop-up event. Pop-up event, what does that even mean? A spontaneous event. I think we're going to do an event this weekend. Why did we decide to do it spontaneously? Because sometimes it's just really nice just to not plan stuff and just dive in. Yeah. So that is why we're doing this pop-up event. We're doing it tonight and tomorrow night. Terrible timing, as most people in the UK know, but idiot boy here didn't really think too far ahead. Yeah, just want to thank everybody for coming. This is a via donation event, meaning that we haven't set a price to be on here. Just make a donation to whatever value you find this, whatever you can afford. I've put the donation information in the chat. I've written it down there. So we've got PayPal in there, which is info@freedomthinking.co.uk. And we've got our bank details there as well. So just thank you to everybody who makes donations. Yeah, and thank you everybody so much for being here. We hope you enjoy it. I'm sure we will. And yeah, I was thinking that seeing as though I've got, please understand, we have a 2-year-old baby, toddler. She's gone to the park. She is a law unto herself. We make plans and she ruins them. So we plan on being here together and doing these calls, but I pretty much guarantee at some point one of us will be running out and going to see Lucia. But she's gone up the park with Grandad at the moment.
It takes
She
a
really
good half an hour to walk to the park. So.
Yeah. So I just thought it'd be really nice to. Do you want to open up? I thought we'd start.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that or do you want me
Yeah, I'll start with that. Yeah. Yeah, and then no, go on to both.
Okay.
I've got a list of things. Not too big a list though.
So you've written this, but I'll speak to what comes to mind is some people here have been around this a long time, some people are newer. But if we can try and put aside what we think we already know, because we're never going to hear anything new if we think we already know it. So if you can see, you're going to have thoughts come up of I've heard that before, or that makes sense, or it doesn't make sense. But just let that come and go. Because if you start thinking about your thinking, you stop listening anyway. So if you can just kind of let things come, let them go. Things pop in our mind all the time, but just letting them come and go. And Dave said to me before, like,
let's expand a little bit. What are you going to now?
I was just going to say this.
Yeah,
I was going to get you to speak to both of them.
Oh, sorry, sweetheart. Yeah.
How should we start? And I said, we've called this true well-being. And I think there seems to be this idea often when I start speaking to people that well-being in some way means that we have an anesthetic to life, so that we only experience feelings that we find comfortable and that we enjoy. And it's been interesting being around the principles. It'll be 20 years next year. Like, I can't actually believe it. I used to be a young one in the community and I'm really not. But it's this idea that our well-being is not dependent on our mood. Our well-being is not dependent on anything. Our well-being exists within us. What our mind and our mood and our thought and our feeling does, that comes and goes, that changes, that's all over the place. But there's something when we get a sense of the well-being that exists within us, or our source, or our true self, or pure thought, or soul, like people have different names for it, but there's something constant within us that's wellness. It's okay. And it doesn't need anything extra, it doesn't need to be added to. It's just constant, perfect well-being. And when I first came to this understanding, because I had such a big shift, I thought at some point I'd learn enough or see enough where I wouldn't have to experience uncomfortable feelings. I would just live in that beautiful, expansive feeling, which I know everyone on this screen has touched upon at times. I thought I got to live there if I understood enough. And I think when I realised, hang on a minute, I don't think this understanding is pointing to that. That's not life. I was a bit disappointed, like, what? But actually, the journey I've now had has been so full and rich, and the learning that takes place through different experiences, that to me is way more valuable than just living in one state. And I think the contrast and the remembering, and the compassion built into that is valuable for us as beings. But I know that when I kind of had that on my kind of list of, right, I'm going to get somewhere, there's somewhere to get to here, there's something with this understanding, there's something that I can learn or hear that will get me somewhere where I live in this one feeling of wonderfulness, that got in the way of me deepening my understanding for a while, because I was just kind of searching, and I had this dissatisfaction that somehow I hadn't seen enough, because I was living not always in that beautiful feeling. Whereas now, I honestly, I don't think about it. I go in and out of all kinds of moods, but I know that that well-being exists within all of us, and that lives us more. So even though I still have moods, I still have ups and downs, there's a direction with this understanding that does lead us to feel more well more of the time. So I think if we can take off our mind this idea that we're somehow going to get one over on life and not have to experience the humanness, we listen deeper, we hear more, and we allow the richness of the colourful nature of it all to take place. And then that idea of being somewhere else, when that's off our mind, there's more space for that inner light to shine. And yeah, so I think that was just something that I know I tripped up over early on in learning about this. And sometimes now I'll speak to people and they've still got this idea that Dave and I live in that beautiful feeling all the time and we don't have ups and downs. And however honest you are, people still seem to think that if you share this understanding, you've somehow, you don't have bad moods. And you're like, no, you still have bad moods. You still have all of it, but it's a very different relationship to all of it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Yeah, I just wanted to just talk a little bit more about listening. Listening is something I never really had much idea about, really. I hadn't really thought too much about listening. I used to think I was a good listener. I used to pride myself, and my mates would come to me and they would tell me I was a good listener because I used to kind of, oh yeah, 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 yeah. Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Oh, that must be awful. And I'd commiserate them in their suffering, and I'd join them in their suffering. And I don't know, that kind of gave the impression to some people that I was actually a good listener. I was a shit listener. I was a shit listener. I've come to understand that, see that a bit better. I still can be sometimes, don't get me wrong. But one of the most valuable things that I came to understand through this conversation was listening. Listening to people. To actually listen. To actually listen is not to listen to our prejudices. To actually listen to somebody is to meet them without the story of who and what we think they are. To actually listen to somebody is to be still. Not physically sat still, I mean still in the mind. To not be listening to our own thoughts. To not be comparing their experience of life to our experience of life. Oh, I know what you're talking about. I've experienced that. Oh, yeah, it feels like this. The moment I do that, the moment I find myself comparing what somebody else has said to how I've experienced life in the past, I'm not listening to them. I'm busy listening to myself. I'm not listening to them. They have not had the same experience as me, and I have not had the same experience as them. That would be an impossibility. But if I am listening through that veil, then I'm not listening. In fact, if there is any noise within my consciousness, any thoughts, any thinking, anything going on, I'm not listening. There's that old saying, "Oh, it's so loud I couldn't hear myself think." We use that analogy in the same way as we use, oh, he's a pain in the neck. A pain in the neck really hurts. Okay, we use that same analogy, that similar kind of analogy when it comes to thinking. So loud I couldn't hear myself think. Why would we say that? Because our thinking can be so loud. It has actually no audible power. You don't hear it with your ears. You don't hear thoughts with your ears. You hear thoughts with your consciousness. But if we are in our thinking, we're not listening to somebody. We're not truly listening to somebody. And when we truly listen to somebody, we start to hear them. There's a big difference between listening and hearing. Many people listen, some people hear. When it comes to this conversation, that's the difference between gaining insight, gaining value, gaining relevance to this conversation and to find something for ourselves, as opposed to it just becoming another intellectual process. This is not an intellectual process. What we're talking about here is not an intellectual process. The intellect is too late. It can't know what we're talking about. No matter what concept we dream up, no matter how we picture it to be, no matter what we think we've heard from such and such a wonderful speaker, it's not that. And it never will be. Because life is not a thought, a thinking. Life is much grander than that. Life is so grand, you cannot think your way there. That's why the intellect has zero relevance to this conversation. Use it. It's great. It's wonderful. It's an absolute wonderful gift. But it's not life. So when we're listening, if you find your mind wanting to compare it, you find yourself dreaming of stuff, thinking about other things, doesn't matter. It's fine. It's fine. Don't beat yourself up. It's no bad thing. We all do it. I do it all the bloody time. But the moment I catch myself doing it, I bring myself back to the present moment. And I come back to listening, just being with that person. And it's amazing who you meet when you're not listening through your prejudgment, especially family members. When we're not listening through our stories, it's amazing the person you meet. Everybody we meet is a character we make up within our mind. Okay, we call this true well-being.
So I gave him the squeak.
A squeakier chair. We call this true well-being because it's what everybody's searching for. It's what everybody on earth is searching for. I loved your description of well-being, Jen, how it's not confined to a certain spectrum of experience. But really, well-being is the fundamental principle of life. Well-being is what exists eternally. Because the being cannot be damaged. The being is not just a physical body. Some people have a bit of an argument about that. Human beings are just meat-covered skeletons. I find that such a fascinating idea. when you start to look at the nature of reality, you start to realize that makes no sense. And anybody who's encountered a dead person or a dead creature will know that the life force, the livingness, the well-beingness no longer inhabits that vessel. There is an aspect, there is a spark of life, there is a magic that animates, that experiences the highs and lows of life, the ups and downs. That cannot be thought. The intellect goes in search of it and it cannot find it. It kind of frazzles, it kind of blows its circuitry when it goes in search of it. Perhaps it rests on some kind of idea. It's still not that. Well-being is at the heart of our very being. It's at the heart of everyone. Jen and I, we have no problem with talking to anybody. Doesn't matter their diagnosis, doesn't matter how long they've been mentally ill for. If we put this up on Spotify, I just did air quotes. I don't like air quotes, but I did them anyway. And mentally ill, air quotes.
Better than a thumbs up.
Yeah, that bloody thumbs up on Zoom now. Is he going to do it? It's not going to do it now. No, well-being is at the very heart of our being. It never goes anywhere. It is the nature of life itself. The nature of life itself is well. If you're listening to this, you are well. Spiritually, you are absolutely fine. Physically, you may face some discomforts. Spiritually, mentally, everybody has true, pure, fundamental mental health as their core. As their core. You can talk a bit about yourself. Why are you here? I don't know.
I can do. I was saying I used to be the most interesting thing to myself. But I've got less and less interesting to myself, like my story, my character, how I'm doing. And even when I first came across the principles, for a long time, I'd always be wanting to talk about the insights I'd had and things that I'd seen and the changes in my character. And it's funny, I think it's a weird direction because I guess mainstream psychology and psychiatry has kind of really got you to look at your character and yourself and your ego and your problems. And it's a never-ending exploration because you can continually think up things that bother you or have affected you. But I've loved this has been just a falling away and a falling away and a falling away of things that don't help us and don't serve us. And I think when I first came to this, I would have said my problems were that I was shy, anxious, I had eating disorders, I struggled with depression on and off, just not really feeling like I knew how to fit into life. One of the things I remember hearing you say is everyone else seemed to know how to do life right, and I didn't, and you didn't know how. And I was like, yeah, that's how I felt. And I think many people feel it. Was I don't know how to do it right. I don't know how to be here. Everyone else seems to have it together, and I just don't. I don't fit. And it's been so amazing to me that over the last 19 years, it was May 2005 when I happened to go on a 3-day retreat with Roger Mills and Margaret Opio in London. Whereas this stillness and that quiet and that ever-present well-being, suddenly, like I was feeling it, I was buzzing with it, but it was nothing that I'd gained. It was just that the noise of my mind had quieted so much. And it was through listening, like listening to something I I didn't really know what was being spoken about. I didn't really know what I was going to. I went along with my sister. But it was this absolute kind of stillness, this peace or a silence. And I remember just sitting in the room and, initially I'd been so anxious because we'd been made to introduce ourselves at the beginning. And I was literally in that moment, I felt like I could have killed my sister because she didn't tell me I was going to have to speak. And my anxiety levels had got so high that my heart rate and my hands were clammy. Like it took me a good hour to sort of settle back down. And then by lunchtime the next day, it was just like this quiet. It was a strange feeling because even though it was unusual, it wasn't. It was familiar. It was a familiar feeling. And it was a feeling I recognized, I think, from different points in my life, but I thought that that was some kind of fluke. I didn't realize it was our default. But the more I was listening, I was like, no, this is my default. But I've been listening to the noise and the chatter. And in a way, I described it as there's been a heavy metal band in my head. And I never knew that actually there was some other beautiful music playing. And I was just sat there and this heavy metal band had just gone, whoop, and all I could hear and see and feel was beauty and understanding. And I was there with my auntie and my sister, and I was just filled with so much love and gratitude. And it's like I didn't want to leave the room at the end because it almost felt like, oh my God, am I going to lose this? But then I sat in the car we drove from London back to Essex, I think about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Everyone was chatting and I just sat there. I was dumbfounded. And I then had to go out to a nightclub to raise money for my friend who was raising money for a charity. And normally if I went to a nightclub, I used to get absolutely wasted. But I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to take anything. I walked around with this bucket asking people for money, having conversations. It was obviously noisy, a nightclub, but this quiet, you were saying like the noise of our head can be so noisy, but the quiet was so loud. And the presence I felt, I just had the best night. It was just, and we had little breaks, and then my cousin was doing it with me, and we were dancing together. And I was thinking, this is the first time I've ever danced in public, not hammered, not wasted. And it was just movement. And it was the start of this kind of uncovering, because that was just the beginning of starting to recognize the truth of it for myself and for other people. Like I've spent so much time trying to manipulate my thinking. I've spent so much time trying to figure out where I went wrong. I've spent so much time looking at myself, at my character, at my creations. I've got so lost in that world that I didn't realize something far simpler was possible. And it was when you recognize that all of that stuff has been born of thought, has been a creation of the mind, that these principles bring to life what we think, and it looks real and true. And some of the things we let come and go, like I often describe, things that I liked wearing when I was 5, 6, suddenly at 10 you don't, 15, 20, our tastes change. Often our tastes in music come and go, and the favorite song that you can listen to over and over again, suddenly you can't bear it, like get it off the radio. Like so much we let come and go. But for some reason, there's aspects of our character that we own and say that they're us, and we get so fixed on them. They become so solid. They become our story that we describe ourselves as. And we not only do that for ourselves, we do it for other people. We create all these characters. But for me, first seeing that creation didn't need to be studied or deconstructed. It was a creation. It was a dream. It was an idea. But actually, that true place that is unchanging, still present, witness, full of love, like that was me. The other stuff was all made up. And I think when you start learning about this, it can seem like there's something we have to learn, and it feels like it might be intellectual. It feels we need to remember. And I know that it took me a couple of years before I felt comfortable sharing with people, because I couldn't put into words what had happened. I couldn't put into words what I'd heard, because I hadn't heard anything in words. What I'd heard was almost that inner silence. Silence doesn't have language or words. So suddenly it was like, how do I put this into words to guide other people there? So suddenly this kind of shy, reserved person was like running courses and speaking to people one-to-one. And it was almost like, despite all the noise of my character that still came and went, like that surprised me. I thought that stillness was going to just wipe that out forever. Aspects have come back in. I can still be like, oh, you're better at that, Dave. You're more confident than me. Oh, you do that because you're really good at asking about things like that. Like, I'll never ask for a discount. Like if we're going to pick something up off Facebook Marketplace, I will never ask for a discount. I get so embarrassed and uncomfortable. I always make Dave do it. But it's like, I don't care. Whereas before, that would be something I needed to work on or I needed to see deeper about. I'm like, that just still looks real for me. And I can laugh at it. And you know what? It doesn't mean anything. But I think to know that we're still going to be here and human and have character and aspects of ourselves. Like I used to think we're, looking past the ego and all of that, but we're here, we're alive, and we see separation. We're going to have ego, because that stillness, that feeling of kind of connection and oneness, if we all lived in that, there would be no experience of the self as a character, as a life, as a friendship, as a relationship, and all of it. And I've just grown in such appreciation for the beauty of it all, and the fun of it all, and the heartbreak of it all, because I've been through all kinds of stuff. But you see, when you know that that space exists, the other stuff doesn't hold the same power anymore. It doesn't define you, and you can get moved and guided by the stillness. That stillness comes to life in you, and you find words to move people, to point people. You navigate life. And it's just, I wished you could write something down and send it to people and them just see it. But like Sid always said, if you start getting a feeling, if you start feeling quieter, if you start sensing that place within you, just leave it alone and let that do the work. Because it's not in anything we say. Like there's been talks that we've given before where I've got so filled with this feeling, and the event has just been amazing and the feedback's been wonderful. And then I've watched the recordings and I'm like, oh, you didn't really say anything particularly. You're telling stories, or you're doing this, and we've mentioned that before. And you're looking for the thing, and you're like, well, what was it that moved and touched people? And I think it's when you sort of come alive with that feeling in yourself, that feeling carries a message beyond the intellect.
Like tuning forks.
Yeah. But yeah, nearly, 19 years in, I still have all kinds of experience. But life has just got more and more magical and just,
Rich.
yeah, full of richness. And you get to love in a far deeper way. You get to just fall in love with yourself and fall in love with life, and you say it's one and the same.
Yeah.
And you get to see it in other people when they don't see it for themselves. Like after I mentioned, we've got family members who have gone in and out of different troubles, but you get to see, wow, behind that story is your perfect well-being, is your default setting. Behind that story, you're whole. And I can see that for you, and I'll keep seeing that for you until you can see it for yourself. And even if you don't see it for yourself, I'll keep speaking to it and I'll keep seeing it. And I think that's been the biggest gift, because I used to worry about people. I used to worry about the world, and I couldn't bear it if anyone else was upset or angry, or whereas now I can see that for what it is. So I feel like to come across this kind of understanding in our lifetime, I think is such a gift. And to have Sydney Banks' audios and his writings, and it has happened that his first language was English, so it doesn't have to be translated so many times. I feel like the essence of it is available for us just to look to, because he knew that what he saw would die with him, but he hoped that his books and his recordings would wake it up within you, wake up the teacher, wake up the guide, wake up the guru in yourself. Then that will guide your life. Like, you didn't need Sydney Banks. He wasn't a guru, he was purely a guide. And I think that's the cool thing. Like, it doesn't matter, he's passed away. I think it was 2009 he passed away. But now, like, the momentum and the movement of the three principles, it's like, I used to know everyone in the UK who was doing. I've got no idea now. It's spread so far. So just seeing this for yourself is enough, because then the feeling that you bring to the world and people you're with is different. Your feeling state, your vibration, yeah. So I think if anyone is listening thinking, oh, I really wish my child or my partner or whoever would learn about this or listen to this, it's not for them, it's for you. And the more it unfolds in you, the more you bring that to whoever you're with, and that's enough. And I think that was a beautiful thing for me, because my sister was desperate for my dad to get involved with this, and it really put him off. So for like 6 months, he was just like, what is this weird thing that my daughters have got involved with? And he said, but there was something about me that just intrigued him. Like, for me to have changed from being how I was to then how I was being, and that be sustainable, he got really interested. And then just one time it just popped in. I was like, invite Dad to that talk you're going to. So Jack Pransky was doing a talk, and I said, do you fancy coming along? It's just an evening thing, no pressure. And then he came, and then he's totally got involved. And yeah, you did the opposite. You rammed it down everyone's throat and put them off for a few years.
I did. I did. Yeah, we do pay respect to Sydney Banks. I'm quite aware that at some point there are going to be people listening to this who perhaps have never heard about the three principles, and we're like over half an hour in and we haven't really spoken about that. Yeah, neither of us see Sydney Banks as a guru. Sid didn't want to be seen as a guru, as a man, but he had a message. He had a message. He had a message that he uncovered during a couple of what you would call mystical or spiritual awakenings. A man who wasn't in any psychiatry or psychology. He was a welder, and I think it was in the 70s. You know better than me.
73.
73. He had a couple of experiences, and during these experiences he came back with information about the psyche, about the nature of reality, about life. And both of us in our lineage, and personally for me, it came through a lady called Sue Huginson, it was Sid that I listened to that really made the coin flip. And for yourself, it was through Dr. Roger Mills. But again, the lineage was from Sid. It's from Sid himself. And we pay respect to this man for his uncovering and his willing to share. And we're just so grateful that that took place during our lifetime, and that we were some of the fortunate people to come across it. Both of us come from a background of suffering, large amounts of suffering in our life. We human beings, we all do. Do you know what I mean? We're not under any illusions. We don't think we're anything different to anybody else. That's what many human beings go through, suffering. Most human beings go through suffering in their lives. But we're just grateful to have come across Sydney Banks and what he described as the three principles. It wasn't actually through the three principles, just gaining insight into the three principles of mind, consciousness, and thought that our personal shifts took place. It was from within ourselves. The change does not take place in the information. The change takes place from within ourselves. The change does not take place from the information. The change takes place from within ourselves. People gain insight. People gain revelation, insight, a vision from within, a realization from within, revelation to reveal something that was already there, something that was already present. Because I don't know about anybody else, but I've spent so much of my life mesmerized by my experience. I've spent so much of my life trying to fix my experience, trying to make myself better, taking medication, drink, drugs, whatever, just taking my anger out on other people, being verbally violent, being physically violent, being violent towards myself, being violent towards inanimate objects, crying because I feel like there's no let up. I mean, I really don't think I'm on my own when I speak about that kind of thing. In 2013, so mine's not as nowhere near as long as Jen, in fact, it's about half the time as Jen. I got to experience what Sid was pointing to whatever degree I got to see it. Bearing in mind that truly when you start to see life, you realize what you're staring at or what you're experiencing is not something that you can quantify. It doesn't exist within the parameters of distance or depth, time. These are all illusions of it. But it in and of itself is actually truly, it's an unspeakable space. It's the most magnificent space of love. It's that before the formation of anything, and it is just a pure state of bliss. That's what life is. Now, we don't get to see that on a day-to-day basis as human beings. I had to go through what some people may call a near-death experience to experience that. To find life was to die, was to leave this earth, was to leave my body. And then to come across Sid a few weeks later and just hear him talk about life as an illusion, suddenly he's making sense, is this man? This man's making sense. This man knows what he's talking about. When he started to explain that reality is a creation of the psyche, kind of a scientific word, but this is what we face when we have conversations. We use words, and each word means something different to different people. You know, and when he explained that reality is a creation of the psyche, it could be very, very easy for us to kind of make that kind of a monotone kind of, this is a bit, well, that kind of reduces life down to like something that isn't very special, doesn't it, Dave? You know, if you say that reality is just a creation of the psyche, but that depends on our definition of what the psyche actually is. That depends on how we perceive the word psyche. Again, we're going back to listening without judgment, listening from afresh. Because to me, when I started to gain insight into the psyche, it was to start to gain insight into the spiritual aspect of myself, something I had zero awareness of. The psyche, when I left my body and left this earth, didn't go anywhere. The psyche was still present. I was still capable of perceiving, being aware, acknowledging, I didn't judge. It's one thing I didn't do. There was no judgment in that space. There's no fear. However, the presence of life was still present in death. And then to listen to Sid when I first opened up a little YouTube video of Sid and to hear him describe it as an illusion, I remember him saying, "You think it's real. It's not real. You just think it's real." Power in those words for me, not for everyone, for me. You think it's real. You think the reality that you are experiencing is the truth. It's not the truth. It never will be the truth. You can't experience the truth whilst you are perceiving distance, time, an idea of a separate self, right, wrong, good, bad, here, there, them and us, me and you, a name. All these things we encounter on this earthly dimension, this earthly plane. That's never going to be truth. Truth is fundamental. It comes before the creation of whatever experience we are encountering. When I talk about experience, another word we could swap for experience would be reality. I always used to think that reality was something that took place outside of myself. I believed that somehow I experienced the world. I never did experience the world. I never will do. I never have. I experience consciousness. I experience whatever my consciousness is making up about whatever going on is taking place. 100% of the time, there is no outside of myself. I've never experienced outside of myself. Everything I've experienced has been a creation of my own psyche. Now, the thing is about the psyche is it's infinite, the infinite potential, the power of thought, infinite potential. There is no end. We will never run out of thoughts. Isn't that a marvelous thing to comprehend, to become aware of? We will never run out of thoughts. What are we? What are we truly? If we are endowed with the infinite capacity for creation, thought, every single invention mankind has come up with has come from thought. Every single realization into physics comes from thought, mathematical equations, learning language, learning to stand up on 2 feet, learning to drive, falling in love, falling out of love, liking, disliking, approving, disapproving, blah, 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 blah. It's all born of thought. This magical force. I remember Sue, who introduced me to this. One of the greatest questions I ever got asked in my life. I usually find the greatest questions I get asked are the simplest ones. Dave, what is thought? I was so pissed off when she asked me that question. I felt like she was really undermining me, my intelligence. I thought she saw somebody a bit more intelligent to ask a 4-year-old question to. Dave, what is thought? What is thought? What is this infinite force? What is this eternal infinite force of creation that we are? Suddenly, when people say things like, be still and know that you are God, it starts to make sense. When you realize that the infinite creative force is within you. It's what exists first before you create anything out of it. Before we create an experience, whether that experience be harrowing, depression, anxiety, rage, or whether it be liberating, freedom, love, compassion, understanding, forgiveness. It's all born of the psyche. It's all born of mind. It's all born of thought. There's a really beautiful thing takes place when an individual realizes there is only one source of experience. There is only one source of their reality. And it's the same source, and it's the same place, and it's the same space for everybody on the planet. It's themselves. Their psyche, their soul, their consciousness, their mind. We've done a very good job of creating duality on this planet. Duality meaning two. Dual. Two. Over here, over there, good, bad, right, wrong, black, white, male, female, blah, 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 blah. We've done a very, very good job of dividing up the mind into component parts. Conscious, subconscious, all the theories behind, I don't know, trauma and stuff like that. How many identities do we have now in the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual of
DCM, I think it is.
DCM, DSM, whichever one it is.
Might be
It's
DSM.
DSM.
Might be DSM.
It's not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. All these new identities that we are creating for the nature of thought. And I think, I mean, I've personally been diagnosed with chronic depression that I would suffer with for the rest of my life. This is what I was told by a psychiatrist. I would suffer with chronic depression for the rest of my life. And I would need to be medicated for the rest of my life. What a load of crap. That's why I ended up getting suicidal, because I thought, well, if that's what my life boils down to, why would I want to be here? What a load of crap. Anybody who's listening to this and you've been diagnosed with that, please understand it's not true. It's not true. If you've been diagnosed with anything, it's not who you are. You are the livingness of life itself. You are the divine creator, experiential reality, giving birth to a being. You're magical. Human beings are not one of the human beings' great inventions. I often say that. But we're not. We didn't invent ourselves. Some fundamental intelligence thought we were a good idea. The same thing that thinks that sycamore keys are a good idea, that aerodynamic key that we call helicopters, what we throw up as kids and watch them spin around. The same thing that thought hollow bones and the capacity for being able to warm those hollow bones up to create buoyancy in the air and give them to birds with feathers to create flight. Intelligence, an intelligence that underpins all of existence, created us out of itself. We are that same thing. That's why throughout time the metaphor of the ocean has been used. We are waves of an ocean. It's a great metaphor. Everything may appear to be separate from one another, but it truly isn't. It's all unified by water. In the same way, as everything that is in existence is unified by intelligence, a conscious state of intelligent, infinite intelligence. Well, guess what? Everything that lays above, so below. All the power that exists in the wave exists in the ocean. All the power that exists in the ocean exists within the wave. We just have to wake up to that point. And this is never something, this isn't something we add to ourselves. It's a pre-existing truth. The only thing is, we've lived in a time of what appears to be severe fucking amnesia, where we, for some reason, we are born and we forget that we are this infinitely divine, spiritual, creative force creating our own reality. You don't believe that we're creating our own reality, do you? Jenny and I don't always see eye to eye. Jenny likes what Jenny likes. I like what I like. Jenny doesn't like metal detecting. I love metal detecting. I'm going metal detecting tomorrow. I can't wait. Jenny isn't. She's going to the beach. Wendy's with Jen. Jerry's not. Cheers, Jerry. Oh, you're shaking your head at both. Yeah, it's like when we start to become aware that we are literally creating our own realities, that everybody on earth lives in their own separate reality. If you remove any judgment about how somebody is living, how they should be living, because bearing in mind that's coming from your reality, how you see the world, you start to become aware of this simple truth that everybody truly is endowed with the creative capacity for creating reality. When we are not aware of that, we start to assume that reality that we encounter is somewhere outside of ourselves, or it's based in time.
There's lots of lovely examples. I think that's the thing I like about this. It's self-proving, because one of the examples that was given on that 3-day training I went to initially was if somebody had fallen over in the street, not everyone reacts to it the same way. So someone might help, someone might walk by, you've added in, someone might like nick something out the pocket, someone else might just watch, someone else might think, oh, they've got it covered, and
Somebody might not notice.
yeah, they're too lost in their thought to even notice. And there was just quite a few examples given, and I remember sitting there thinking, it's so like we're so mesmerized by our own reality, by the way that we see things. It never really even occurred to me that everyone is living in their own reality and it looks real and true. Like that started to blow my mind. And then suddenly you're like, well, that has to be true. It's why we all like different people, wear different clothes, like different bands, choose different things.
Food.
Our whole life, like everything. It's like there's no two people that are identical. Even identical twins have different characters and likes and dislikes, and genetically, you know, they're the same. But you start to look and you're like, this has to be true. And I think that was the other thing I loved about learning this. It was never like, believe what we say, take what I say to be truth. It's like, start listening and then go into life and look, and you'll see that there is evidence everywhere for the truth of the reality being created through thought, and that we all live in our own separate reality. And when Sid said, it's not real, you think it's real, you start seeing evidence for that, because you're like, but oh, hang on a minute. In one moment, my partner to me looks like the most amazing thing in the world, and God, how could we ever fall out because everything's just so wonderful? The next moment, something minor has become so irritating. They're the most irritating person in the world. And you're like, well, which one of those is true? Both of them. The first one. But you start to see we create constantly, and whatever we create looks real, and we just move and act. But I've loved starting to notice my creations often before I open my mouth. I can be like, this feeling is an indicator that you're really lost and that you're creating something that's really not going to be helpful. So my relationships changed. I don't always do it. Sometimes I still act out of it. But a lot of the time you start being aware of your own thought creations and the feeling state you're in. And actually, I wasn't as willing to give up my nice feeling in the way that I used to be. Because I'd be so like, I remember Keith Blevins, a teacher of this, describing it to me as justified negativity. When we feel justified in being negative, it doesn't look like thought. It just looks like, no, well, I'm being negative because you did that. And you start to see that. You're like, oh my God, even that comes from me. And you start taking responsibility for your own world. And I think it's not in a heavy way. I remember just trying to describe that to someone. I said, it's not heavy, this idea of taking responsibility. It's liberating. Because I literally used to hand out my good feeling or my bad feeling, like, oh, there's lots of people around, I'm going to feel bad, I'm going to feel insecure. Oh, somebody told me off, I'm definitely going to feel awful, like constantly at the mercy of the world. And then suddenly I came across it, I'm like, whoa, like it doesn't come from out there. Some people like totally, like, you don't like being told off, but it doesn't really bother you that much. Whereas I can be like, this is the worst thing ever. But you see, like the same stimulus, different reaction. It has to be coming from us. And it's not that your reaction's right or mine. You just see it's all thought. It's all made up. None of it's as real as we give it credit for.
None of it's fixed. And I think that's when you know, it was quite interesting. I love physics. And when you start to look into quantum physics, you realize that reality, the foundational fabric, Helen's probably going to tell me off now. Her dad's a theoretical physicist, but he's a great man. I love having a chat with him. But the very foundational particles like photons, electrons, they come in and out of existence. They behave like both particle, like a marble, like a fixed, solid, stony thing, solid, round thing, whatever, something that's tangible. They can be both particle and wave. That's the fabric of the physical dimension. That's what it's made of. And it just so happens it seems to collapse into a particle, into a solid thing when it's observed. That was what the double slit experiment showed over 100 years ago. That was our introduction to the quantum world, where that creates the physical dimension behaves very, very differently to that's created. You know, Newton has his laws, had his laws, and yeah, they were great, but they didn't work in the quantum dimension. They fell apart. They needed a new set of laws when it came to quantum. And when you start to understand that, and you start to understand our reality as well, our psychological, our psyche reality, our spiritual reality, you realize it's the same process. It's both wave and particle. I'm not saying like in the physical sense, because reality, our experiential reality, is a spiritual encounter. It's a spiritual reality. It's a non-physical, non-tangible thing, but something that we can observe. So say, for example, I can observe that pigeon out there, which is walking along, trying to escape another pigeon that looks like it's getting rather amorous. And I could have all kinds of judgments about it. And when I have the judgment, it could look particle, it could look fixed, it could look real. But all of a sudden, when that judgment collapses, returns to wave, I can have a new particle emerge about it. As above, so below again. And you start to realize that our realities are fluid. That's the beauty of our mind, that our mind is fluid. We are infinite potential, and we limit this infinite potential by believing everything that we think. Because the moment we believe what we think it's true and real. So, for example, Jenny used to believe that she was had an eating disorder and was a shy, anxious person. And I used to believe that I was an angry man who would never get over depression. And that was solid and true and real. And that's what I experienced because I believed it. That was the thinking that came to mind an awful lot. But once I became aware that it's an illusion, I'm not always depressed. Have you ever paid attention, Dave, to the points when you're watching a funny film and you're laughing. Where's your depression gone in that moment? Bearing in mind that time does not exist, there is only the moment. Where was depression in that moment? Where is an addict's addiction when they're not craving, when their mind isn't on drugs? To start to become aware that we only feel what we feel when we think what we think, whether that be conscious or unconscious. You know, a good friend of mine jumped in a van one day and I spoke to him about this. He was an addict, cocaine addict. I think he had 1,500 quid a month habit. I have no idea where he got that money from. But I spoke to him about this. That addiction isn't an illness, it's a thought. It only exists in thought. Quite a controversial thing to say, I know. And I know it really upset a lot of people when I used to work in a 12-step charity. I upset a lot of people when I explained to them that their addiction's not a disease. You're not diseased. You're not ill. But if you keep believing that you are diseased, you're going to experience that. Jesus Christ, I'm not a religious man, but Jesus Christ said, it's done unto you as you believe. He's talking about reality. He was talking about our experience of life. As we believe, so we experience. If you believe that there are terrible people around every single corner, you're going to walk around every single corner in fear. It's not the corners creating the fear. If you believe that the weather makes you sad, every time it rains, you're going to get upset. It's not the weather making you upset. I love the rain. I have no problem with the rain. From the Lake District. You kind of have to get used to it.
Totally see it say rain, rain, go away, come back at night time.
Yeah.
I don't like rain.
Yeah. But when we start to see that our realities are a creation of ourselves. I love what you say. It's not effortful, it's not difficult, it's not kind of heavy. No, the victim dies. It makes life so much simpler. Life becomes so much simpler. Our relationships get better when we start to take responsibility for our own experience of life, our own feelings, when we realize the only thing that can create this magical display of consciousness that I call my life is my consciousness, is the way I'm using my gift of thought. How else could I possibly flavor my reality? If my reality was flavored from outside of myself, the world, the war, the politics, the financial situation, climate change, all these scary things that are going on in the world, if my reality was truly affected by that, wouldn't it stand to logical reason that so everybody else's would be too? Because that would be reality. Reality imposing itself outside of us onto ourselves. But it can't. It's impossible. It doesn't mean we don't interact with the world. It doesn't mean that we don't walk around on a physical dimension. But nothing outside of our own consciousness thought has the capacity to make us experience or feel anything. Only consciousness thought creates reality. Please, I invite anybody, go and find an exception. Find an exception. This is where some people would say, war, Dave, what about war? When somebody's been shot at, you're telling me that, and we've had this, haven't we? You're telling me that they wouldn't be scared? I said, some people, not everyone. Some people never feel more alive than when they're being shot at, when they're at war. Many people come out of my brother-in-law's come out of the army and he's gone straight into doing mental stuff, rock climbing and trying to find a buzz for life. Trying to find the same buzz that he gets when he's in a near-death experience, like close to death, when he's living at his most present time. If somebody's truly present, it's a beautiful experience. If somebody's being shot at, quite often they describe it as being a truly present experience. I could see that, I could hear that, I could hear this. Oh, you won't believe the reality I encountered. I've never experienced anything like it. But then there are also the people who are terrified to varying degrees. Some are crippled by it. And some are just scared. Some are scared and capable of carrying on with their work, and some aren't. If reality was being shot at, creating the experience, then surely they would all have to experience the same thing. But the fact that they're not shows there must be something else going on. There must be something else at play. That's what I'm interested in. That's where the magic lies. It doesn't lie in analyzing our thinking. It doesn't lie in analyzing our feelings. It doesn't lie in analyzing our pasts. It lies in the present moment. It lies in the discovery of the creator, ourself. Now, the creator does not exist in time. That's why anybody who encounters the present moment has a spiritual experience. That's why people write books about the power of now and stuff like that, because the moment somebody is in the present moment, they have a spiritual experience. Why? Because they meet life. What is life? It's a spiritual experience. They meet themselves. They meet the moment. We are the now, by the way. And the now isn't a moment in time. We are the now. Time doesn't exist. Time is an aspect of thought. It's a creation of thought. It's an illusion. Let's take a break. Let's have 10 minutes. Come back. We'll come back at 8:30. So it's about 12 minutes now, according to what we're on. It'll be 13 minutes if I'm going off my laptop. We'll come back at 8:30. So back in 13 minutes. All right, welcome back, everyone. We've lost Jenny for a little bit. Lucy has just come back from the park. So I think Jen's going to see if she'll go in the bath, and Grandad will be watching over in the bath, and or she might see if she can get to bed. I don't know which as yet, but she'll be coming back at some point, I hope. Yeah, one of the things Jen and I were discussing just during that break was how, when we hear this, it can be quite easy for us to become very, very aware of our thinking. That can have kind of a twofold kind of consequence. One thing is it can be exceptional. One of the things that this conversation can quite often do is bring to the foreground our egos. You get to see the beliefs and thinking that you live out of, like almost like sometimes it kind of shows it to you. Did you know you live like out of this? Did you know you live with this belief? Did you know you think like this about that person? And so you may call that the subconscious mind coming into the conscious mind, but bearing in mind the subconscious mind and the conscious mind are not two things. They're the same force used in two different ways. They're consciousness thought. But also that can be a really, really useful thing. But quite often we also, to begin with, can see people kind of drop into this, I'm a victim of my thinking. I need this thinking to go away. What you're saying is, Dave, that if you become aware of what you're talking about, you won't think these thoughts. That's not what we're saying. I want to make that perfectly clear. This isn't about getting rid of anything. This isn't about, like Jen said right at the beginning, this isn't an anesthetic to life. We don't need an anesthetic to life. We can't be broken. You might need an anesthetic if you were to go under the knife to be fixed. Perhaps they needed to reposition a bone or something like that, or put in some stitches or heal a wound. We cannot be psychologically wounded. Trauma is a big, big old conversation at the moment. I want to just talk a little bit about trauma. I hope I don't offend anyone, but I'm going to be candid and I'm going to be straight, and I want people to question for themselves whether they believe that this is a true statement. Trauma is an illusion. I'm not saying the feeling. I'm not saying that something didn't happen. Perhaps it happened many times. I'm not saying that the past didn't happen. But what I'm saying is the way that we treat trauma is misunderstood. Trauma is misunderstood. Trauma's almost treated like it's a physical ailment, like a broken bone, something we need an anesthetic for in order to fix. But that's not really the way that reality works. The problem with trauma is it's based in time, and time is an illusion. I just want people just for a moment just to look around. I just want them to take a moment just to look around and try and see the past. Try and find it. Please look out the window, get up, go outside if you need to. Try and see it. Try and find the past. Where is it? I think we're going to struggle to find it. We can't go there. Can't go into the past. We can't go back. However, we do get to experience the past as an illusion. This is the importance of the realization of the now. You know, there's so many psychological disorders, air quotes again, that are based in the past. In fact, the entirety of Freud's work, so the 99.999% of psychiatric, psychological therapies are based in trying to heal the past. Trying to heal something that doesn't actually exist. Trying to fix something that is no longer here. PTSD, post, after, trauma, stress, disorder. After the fact, don't feel so good. No disorder. It's the mind working beautifully. It's just not understood. People don't understand the nature of mind. Anybody who starts to gain insight into the nature of mind realizes the mind cannot actually be disordered. It thinks. And as it thinks, so it experiences. So somebody who thinks an awful lot about the traumatic event that once took place, or a few times took place, and they think about it in the now, they create that experience in the now. It's all that's happening. And they create it in the same way as what they would joy, by using the power of thought. You know, that creates everything that I like about myself, about the world, about, I don't know, I love nature, I love metal detecting. I go through umpteen, God knows how many hobbies a year. Fascinated by this, fascinated by that. Jenny says I've got some kind of psychiatric disorder because I'm always in and out of some kind of mad thing. Like, oh, what's he on to now? Felting birds. That's not some sexual thing. That's like taking wool and poking it with pins and making. Just want to clear that up. Lino printing, anything. One thing to the next. But that creates the feelings of joy and excitement, and inspiration is the same thing that creates what I suffer. In order for me to feel inspired, I have to be having inspiring thought, something that I find interesting that Jenny doesn't. It's inspiring to me. Jenny's so inspired by organic, healthy eating and food, and how can we make some delicious food? And I'm all right with that. Yeah, I'm down with that, but not like Jen. But that creates my suffering is the same force. Thought. Thought in the now. When we start to realize the nature of reality, it narrows everything down. It narrows everything down to a singular point. And this singular point is as simple as that. That dot. That dot is the now. Doesn't go anywhere. It is the space from which everything emerges, whether that's creation on a universal scale or creation within the personal scale. Everything exists in the now. Nothing exists in time. So when it comes to people suffering from these past traumas, and we treat them as though they are the sole cause of our experiential reality, why we feel like we feel, what we're experiencing as our life. When we treat them as though they are, that is the root cause, what happened then is why you are like that today. I experienced this tons of times in my psychological encounters as a service user. Like I remember talking about, oh, do you know what I've just remembered? I've remembered I was present when my grandfather died, and I got to see him dead, and I was 3 years old. And in my mind, I relived the entire. I'd completely forgotten about this. I relived the entire experience. I even knew I could see the color of the curtains. I could see the light coming through the curtains. I could smell the room. I was there. I was there then, now. And I could see my grandfather with his head. He was in the middle of the bed with his head back and his mouth wide open. And then I remember panic setting into my little body, and I started running on the spot, didn't know what to do with my little body. I just started running on the spot, panicking, because I knew it was going to be the last time I ever saw my grandfather. And I remember then coming back into the room and saying, I was present when my grandfather died. And this is when I was going through the breakup of my first marriage. And then I remember the psychiatrist saying to me, great, we're getting somewhere now. See you next week. I remember walking out of there going, I don't really think that's got anything to do with why I'm having an affair. I think that's a lot of crap. And to start to for me, since that point, since because it wasn't long after that I started to gain insight into life and starting to see that really, in true reality, there is only ever one thing happening. As I think now, I am experiencing. So yes, I got to relive my grandfather's death, but I got to relive it in the now. How did I do it? Bearing in mind, it no longer exists on the face of the planet. My grandfather's been in the ground for 40 odd years. But I can still see it. I can still experience it. But how do I experience it? I have to think it. I have to think it back into being. Now, that is an amazing gift that we are given. We're given the capacity to time travel. Human beings want to time travel. One of our greatest problems is we time travel. We travel back to that moment, back to that moment, back to that moment. We bring that moment back into the now, bring that moment back into the now. We relive it, we relive it, we relive it, we relive it, and somehow thinking that in reliving the trauma, and this is another thing we've been encouraged to do, by reliving the trauma, somehow we're going to find freedom from it. No. Whatever we create, we experience. Whatever we're thinking about, we experience. We're creating it. We just recreate it continuously. And in psychiatry and psychology, we are being encouraged to recreate our trauma over and over again, thinking that somehow in the recreation of it over and over again, we're going to find freedom from it. Does that make sense? Makes zero sense to me. To start to understand that it's a thought. That's what the past is now. It's a thought. It only exists in thought, and that thought we call memory. Again, we divide thought up. We keep giving it all different characters, which is great. But in that aspect, we call past thought memory. But memory is a thought. Trauma is a thought. Trauma is not a thing. There's something that's said in the Bible. It says, the truth will set you free. Yeah, logic. Logic sets us free. You won't find truth in our experience of life. That is a psychological creation. That is a spiritual reality we are dreaming. But when we start to understand the fundamental principles of the laws of the psyche, of the mind, of thought, now they're universal truths. It's not just my truth that the past doesn't exist. It's everyone's truth. It's not just my truth that there is no such thing as the future. The future doesn't exist. You know, people worry about the future. It's impossible to worry about the future. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist to worry about. What people are really suffering when they're worried, anxious, whatever it is, when they're living in that future thinking, is they're experiencing thought now about what they think the future may look like. That's it. There is only thought now.
I was just going to say, when you spoke about trauma, I don't know if you'd already said it, but thought isn't located in the brain. And I think there's a lot of discussion about trauma being somehow somewhere in the body, but thought isn't located just within our brain. They're starting to realize thought isn't, you can't locate it. So this idea of holding trauma is still within thought, whether conscious or unconscious, but that doesn't mean brain. It means within thought. And I think that's a distinction that feels quite important to make, because people we've spoken to have experienced extreme trauma and then seem to be reliving the trauma, think somehow it's something that they can do with thinking, think themselves out of it, but it's recognizing that it's only experienced through thought now, and that thought is a spiritual thing. It doesn't have location. It means that there's nothing, we don't have to work on it. We just have to we start to understand it. We understand what it is, and that's very different. So our relationship suddenly to that changes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I've come in at a funny time and
No,
added that. It's just when you sort of were talking about it and then moved on. But
no, it's a cool point, because one of the things that, I don't know, anybody who's read the biology of belief or looked into epigenetics will understand that one of the first discoveries that they discovered was that cells think. They live independent. You take a stem cell out of a stem and put it in a petri dish, it thinks. It can shy away from toxins. It can recognize toxins. How can anything recognize anything without thought? It knows when to take in nutrients. It knows when to excrete. How can anything know when to take in nutrients or excrete without thought? Thought we tend to think of as thinking. Jen and I, when we're talking about thought, we're talking about something so much bigger. The infinite. I want to just repeat that word. Infinite. Unlimited force of creation. I don't know, I was diagnosed with chemical imbalances of my brain. Again, my brain was malfunctioning. That's why I was always angry. You know, you've got these chemicals, Dave, and these chemicals, you are just all you are is a bag of meat and bones. Don't forget that. Just a skeleton with meat all over you. But you produce these chemicals, and these chemicals control your thoughts. False. Thoughts are non-physical. People who have had near-death experiences quite often speak about their clarity of thought outside of the brain. There was what was she called? An honorary student who was in a severe head-on car crash in America. She suffered a serious head injury. She was taken to hospital, x-rayed her skull, and she was discovered to only have a brain stem. And this blew everybody's mind. It had never been picked up on. She'd never struggled in life. She could drive. She was an honorary student at a university, but it was discovered through an x-ray she only had a brain stem.
Or CAT scan.
Was it CAT scan? She'd only had a brain stem. No brain, no frontal cortex, no frontal lobe, no left, right, whatever. But she was still perfectly capable of living a life. This life is not what we think it is. However, it appears exactly as we think it does. And this is the problem when we look at life as and ourselves as just bodies. We must take into account the spiritual aspect of ourself. A dead body does not experience any trauma. A dead body doesn't feel. A dead body doesn't see. A dead body doesn't experience. A dead body doesn't have communication. It disintegrates and goes back into the earth from which it was made. But when we are alive, this livingness, this experiential event, this nowness of living here, right now, this that you're experiencing, we're all experiencing right here, right now, in our own individualized expressions and ways. If this is making sense, then you're creating that experience. If this sounds like utter bollocks, you're creating that experience. Doesn't matter. No judgment. Doesn't matter. It's working anyway. What we're talking about is working anyway. You start to see that we must integrate this other aspect of ourselves, the consciousness aspect, the mind aspect, the thought aspect. Somebody once said to me, but Dave, isn't thought the firing of a neuron, the creating of synaptic bridges? Well, in this girl's case, it clearly isn't. But in our case, and in my case, as being diagnosed with chemical imbalances, to start to realize, oh, no, I produce those chemicals with how I think. The chemicals don't create the thought creates the chemicals. Form cannot create formless. Chemicals are form. Thought is formless. However, formlessness creates all form. It's from the formlessness that from the nothingness that the particles emerge before returning back to infinite potential. It's from formless everything comes. So to my point to that, no, it's not the firing of a neuron that is the thought. There is something telling the neuron to fire. For a neuron to fire, it requires energy. For a synaptic bridge to be built, it requires energy. What's the energy? What's the intelligence? What's the power behind that movement? Because if I want to throw this phone from here to there to create a movement, it takes an energy exchange. Potential energy, kinetic energy turns into heat, sound energy, blah, 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 blah. It's energy. It requires an energy behind it. What's the energy behind our brains? What's the energy behind our eyes? What's the energy behind our being? That's what I'm interested in, because a dead body does not fire synapses. A dead body does not continue to create synaptic bridges. It needs the livingness of life in it. It needs our spiritual essence in it. That's what I'm interested in. So yeah, we've, like you were saying, we've heard, no, trauma stored in the body. No, trauma stored in memory. Trauma is a thought. Doesn't matter whereabouts in the body it is. We're not saying that thought is located in the brain. The heart perceives apparently before the brain. Quite often the heart tells the brain more than the brain tells the heart. So we're not saying it's located. That's not what we're saying. As much as this kind of, it opens up so many wonderful questions, but it will always come back to, where does that question arise? It arises in thought. Where will the answer arise? Well, it will arise from thought. Everything comes from thought. The whole experience of life is a dream. I can dream up my chemical imbalances just by sitting here and driving myself mad. My body doesn't know the difference between whether I'm awake in a fight, physically in a fight, or if I'm dreaming I'm having a fight, or if I just sit around thinking about fighting. My body doesn't know the difference. It will release adrenaline and cortisol. It'll make my heart pound, get me all riled up. Yep, my body will be full of those chemicals, but I had to think it. Whether it was in the awake state, whether I was fast asleep dreaming, still thought, consciousness creating a reality. It's a wonderful thing. The most beautiful thing that 99.9% of humanity has never noticed. What's going on? What's truly going on? What is this life? What is life? Too busy running around trying to change it without asking the question, what is it? When is it? Where is it?
Just came to mind then, I'm not going to go into too much detail. But in 2019, I went through something which was quite traumatic, and I've worked with other people who'd been through similar things and had been traumatized by it for years. And looking back, I feel so grateful to have come across this understanding beforehand, because the initial thing was traumatic, and then afterwards it kept coming to mind. It kept coming to mind. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, it would be on my mind. But I also got to kind of bear witness to that, and I kind of could see that I was almost trying to make sense. I was trying to make sense of it all. I was trying to figure it all out. But I got to kind of, over the period of about 3 or 4 weeks, really bear witness to like the trauma of it coming back to mind, and not buying into it too much and letting it do its thing and then pass through. And then just slowly it stopped coming to mind so much, to the point where I think it was about 6 months after, we were on a one-to-one with somebody on Zoom, and you said, would it be all right to share about, and you mentioned a name, and I went, who, which one? And then you had to explain it to me. I was like, oh yeah, no, that's fine. And it blew my mind that something that had been so all-encompassing for the first few days, and then pretty encompassing for about a month, had fallen off my mind. And I think that's the kindness built into our system. That's the kindness built into us, which I think as children, we let that system run and we allow it to sort of come and go. But we have learnt to, I think we've kind of had a psychology that thinks we need to work on it. We need to do something with it, that somehow that natural immune system that we have for the body somehow doesn't exist for the mind. And I think that's what I think was uncovered for me. It's like, wow, the mind has the same immune system that the body does. It has the ability to go through trauma and difficult time, but it also has this beautiful buoyancy and resiliency built into it to help us navigate and move through. But we've had a psychology that thinks somehow that the intellect's going to solve it and fix it, and then we study it and we tell people they're ill, and we tell people that you've been through that, so you're going to be traumatized. You're
You
just
go through these 5 stages.
all of that information. And again, it's like, what a gift in a life to start to understand or be in awe or aware of the fact that we're built perfectly to deal with life. And like Sydney Banks was under no illusions. You say life is a contact sport. Things are going to happen. We're going to love and lose, and all of that's going to happen. But built into us is the ability to feel deeply and to still then come back to that ever-present well-being. And we'll then have a time limit. Well, I can feel upset for this amount of time, but now I've been feeling upset for too long, so there's something wrong with me. Like, we don't always get to choose. There's been other things, probably smaller, that have happened in my life, which for some reason have taken longer to pass through. I don't know why. But you gain respect for the fact there is an absolute perfect system at play. And system's the wrong word, again, because it makes it sound mechanical. There's this deeper spiritual intelligence, life force living us, and it's there and it's available. But for some reason we have entertained the intellect and our thinking and think that somehow we can do it better. Like, I know if I've had like a cut that I've then started thinking I could fiddle with and help it a bit, or like I want to pick the scab off, and then you just make it worse. You clean it, you leave it alone, and the immune system does this amazing job. And it's the same with my mind. Whenever I'm trying to like fix something or figure it out or know what to do, I get so heavy with it. And it's when it's fallen off my mind or I'm just falling off to sleep that something comes in. It's through like the easing off the insight comes. It's that quietness, but we've just got used to listening to the noise.
It's a bit like I've started doing Kung Fu, and the movements are always so relaxed, you're fluid. It's only in the last minute of like the impact that there's actually a tensing, and then it's relaxed off. Everything is so fluid, everybody's floppy. It's quite a difficult skill to get your head around, to be honest. But they say, you know, it's all in the relaxed. Why relaxed? Because you're fluid, because you can move, you're not rigid, you can respond quicker when you're relaxed. If you've already got all your muscles tensed, you can't respond over there. If you've got these muscles tensed and this, that, and the other. And the act of, it's only on impact do we actually create the tension, because it's in the looseness into the tension that there's this extra kind of created, this extra bang created. And it's true. You can see it, you can hear it on the pads. And again, that's like ourselves. You know, that is like a metaphor for life. The intellect was supposed to be used as a tool. It was not something to live out of. The ego was a tool to identify ourselves and to live through, not out of. But really, the ego is an illusion. Again, the ego, when we talk about the ego, it's not a fixed thing. It's a ball of thoughts. The ego is all the thoughts that we think are real. It's our beliefs. It's our truths. The ego really hasn't got any power over us because it doesn't really exist. It's a thought. No thought has any power.
I was just gonna say, Wendy had her hand
Yeah.
up and now it's not up.
When?
I didn't know if you'd already answered. I didn't know.
When? And what were you going to say, love?
She's given up on us. She's
God
taking it
bless.
down.
Sorry.
No, I didn't. I was laughing right in the beginning when you talked about, you know, I'm going to say something that might offend, or you might be worried about trauma being stored in the body. And modern psychology says, let's go look at it and pick the scab. And that seems to be the smart way to go about it. And all of a sudden, I'm a nurse, and it just made me laugh. I was like, what if we thought revisiting every time we fell and scabbed our knee or every time we broke a bone, or every time we had a headache, or every time we had the measles, or every time we had a sore throat, we felt like that was some sort of a physical trauma that or physical event that we needed to remember, recall, revisit. And just to what Jenny just said, you know, we're just the immune system of the body. Okay, you scabbed your knee. There's no more blood. The knee's been healed over. The bones knit back together. You don't have a sore throat. You don't have a temperature. You don't have a fever. Move on. Can you imagine if every illness we ever had, every physical something we wanted to keep revisiting? And
Yeah.
remember, I couldn't go to school for 3 days when I had that sore throat. That was really upsetting. I missed the school play. I didn't get to go out and play with my friends. I mean, and I think there probably are people who do that when they're 40, 50, 60 years old. But anyway, it just made me smile to think about, it's just so great that life is a contact sport. We break bones, we have sore throats, we might have something really, you know, like a death facing illness or car accident or something like that, and we're on the other side of it. We don't keep going back and saying to the doctor, are you sure the bones? Shouldn't I have another x-ray? Shouldn't I have an annual x-ray to make sure my arm's not broken? I mean, we just don't do that. And it's so great that we don't have to do it with the mind either.
Yeah, and speaking to you, I like that, and it's like it's like we weren't particularly like a doctor. You did have something like laryngitis to go back to the doctor and go, oh, how are you feeling? Oh, I feel like I'm getting a bit better. Okay, I'm going to reinfect you with laryngitis again. Let's keep reinfecting you. Every time you feel better, let's reinfect you. You're still not feeling good. Let's put some more laryngitis in there. Let's keep on making you feel ill. How's your broken leg feeling? Oh, it's still not great. Go on, let's break it again. We won't stand for that. But it really is no different if we're being encouraged to keep going into our trauma, air quotes. We're creating it. One of my good friends went into a rehab for alcoholism, and he spotted this in their system of working. I have deep respect and love for anybody who wants to help people. I want to make that perfectly clear. I have deep respect and love for anybody who wants to help the next person. So I have deep respect and love for this gentleman who tried to help my friend. I don't have deep respect and love for his ideas, but for the person, for the soul, I have deep respect and love. And my friend told me about how he was having a really good day, and he went to see the therapist in there, and he said, how's your day going? Really good. Oh dear. All right. And he said, by the end of it, he said, I came out, I was crying. He said, I said, well, what happened? He said, he just made me talk about all the terrible things that had happened in my life. I said, well, does that make sense to you to find your well-being to keep digging up your suffering? And he said, no, he did discharge himself. Oh, it is loose. He did discharge himself. Yeah. Hey, lovely. Hey, chicken licking.
Got the rest of the pajamas.
Thanks, Pete. Cheers, Grandad. Yeah, and I got to sit down with this man who actually who was trying to help him. And bless this man, when I met him, he was a really beautiful man. Give us 1 minute. Give us 1 minute. There we go. He was a truly beautiful man. But I remember sitting down at the table with him, and he was saying, I'm the new psychologist. I said, all right. I said, how do you find it? He went, oh, it's so hard. I said, oh, I can imagine it. It's pretty challenging working in here at times. And he said, oh, it's just difficult working with broken people all the time. I said, really? I said, do you believe that they're broken? He said, yeah. He said, it was only 5 years ago through doing psychiatry that I realized I was broken. That's honestly what he said to me. Honestly what he said to me. I didn't say anything to this man. I just ate my tea and just made polite conversation with him and just enjoyed his company. But it did strike me, the question, if you don't believe in mental health, how can you possibly guide people to it? If you believe these people are broken, you believe you're broken, we've got the blind leading the blind there. That's our psychiatric psychological system. Health of the healer, Jerry, yeah. It's a really sad state of affairs. This is why people who get stuck in the system find it very, very difficult to get out. But this is why we're here. And when I say we, I don't just mean me and Jen, I mean everybody who's watching or listening to this. Because as you start to discover the truth about life, that everybody is psychologically well, bar for what they're thinking in the moment. And even when they're thinking shitty things in the moment, doesn't mean they're broken. Hold on. Doesn't mean they're broken. I have all kinds of thinking. I often say this, I have thinking that I would not share with you lot for fear of social isolation. I have illegal thinking, I have immoral thinking, I have insane thinking. It's all thought. It doesn't matter. You know, I remember doing one of these retreats online, and I wrote on the board and drew a diagram, and I said, you know, the suicide thought, the thing, you know, suicide thought, terrible thought. Oh God, if he's having the suicide thought, there's something seriously wrong now. And I said, but the suicide thought is born of the same thing as what flavor yogurt do you want? It's the same stuff in a different disguise. It's like waves on an ocean. Suicide thought, like a wave on the ocean. What flavor yogurt do I want? It's like a wave on the ocean. They're both water. They're both thought. One we think is serious, again, only possible via thought. And the other one we think is mundane. But if you start to get to the crux of life, you realize it's all the same thing, showing up in a different respect. Fear dies. You realize there's nothing to be afraid of. When fear dies, what's left? Love, compassion, all the attributes of love, forgiveness, all the wonderful aspects of life. Because the only thing that keeps us separated from that is an illusion of our own mind, fear. When we realize we don't need to fear, the only thing that we can ever truly fear is a thought. Our thought. A thought we dreamt up. Like an artist painting a picture. Painted a scary picture and then got afraid of their own picture. That's the only thing we can ever truly actually be afraid of. Because life is an inside job. Reality is an inside job. Experience comes from inside, not outside. There is no outside. You cannot step outside. Everybody's free. Everybody's whole. Everybody's psychologically well. As soon as they're ready to live it. It's there, waiting. What do you reckon, Bubba? And those are your friends? You're looking at all your friends? It's Jerry and Wendy. Another Wendy and Joseph. See Marie's picture? Some other friends on there, but you can't see them because they're behind their names.
Has anyone else got questions? Or comments? Anything that's come to mind?
I think I had some interesting insights during the first part of the conversation, or just some belief that sort of became clear that I'm swimming in. So just like life is just one big disappointing disappointment machine or something. Yeah, and just other things like life is untrustworthy, or life always ends in disappointment, that kind of things. And also about my own family, like I have a sister, and for as long as I remember, I didn't really like her. So I was thinking like, okay, I don't like my sister. And then the question, like, what if that is thought? What if I'm making that up? That at some point in time, I sort of decided like, I don't really like her. And then it became like a truth. It just, I just don't like this person. And this is like the first time that I started wondering, oh, wait a minute, what if this is also just, what if I think it's real? And so it's that kind of thing that's like opening up something for me. Like,
What else could it be, Wim? I want you to think about it just for a moment. What else? Can you think of anything else that could possibly create that experience?
first thing that comes to mind is like that it's just true that life is disappointing. And if it makes sense, like life is a contact sport, okay, then you know, like you're gonna get hit and you're gonna have suffering, and so in a way there will be disappointments, I guess, because it's human to have expectations and then get disappointed or disillusioned when uh, uh, but yeah, it's all thoughts, but that doesn't sort of make it go away, the fact that life is full of disappointment. Well, or, but there are many disappointments, like anyway, yeah.
Disappointment surely has to be a perspective. Jenny's gone to list. She's still on. She's listening from a phone now. Lucy's getting vocal. Disappointment has to be a perspective. We're not condemning any feelings in this conversation. We're not saying we shouldn't feel anything in this conversation. We're saying there's no such thing as a wrong feeling at all. However, whatever we feel is always up for grabs. You know, a shift in perspective brings around a corresponding shift in the experience or reality we encounter. You know, you spoke just then about your sister. I remember being working in South Africa, and there was this beautiful black lady there. She said, "You can't teach an old dog new tricks," she said to me. I said, "How old are you, by the way?" She went, 28. I'm like, get out. Get out. But she really didn't like her brother. She called him a coconut. Black on the outside, white on the inside. She called him a coconut.
Sorry, I missed the whole thing because I was
Sorry, buddy. I was sorry, Jerry. When you did, you went off. I was just saying, disappointment is a perspective. And we're not decrying any perspective. We're not saying any perspective is wrong. We're saying all perspective is created the same way. Whether it's disappointment, whether it's optimism, whether it's inspiration, whether it's, oh, it doesn't matter. Next. It's all born of the same space. So when something shows up like disappointment, it can be really easy for us to go, oh, that's true. Well, it's just true until you think something differently and it suddenly looks different. That's how fixed our realities are. That's why when Sid said, you think it's real, it's not real. That's what he's talking about on one level. But I was saying about a lady in South Africa, a black lady who called us, didn't like her brother, called him a coconut. Black on the outside, white on the inside. I said, go on, then what makes him white on the inside? She went, well, he wears socks and sandals. I said, look, love, no self-respecting white man does that. And she said he kisses my mum and tells her he loves her. I said, wow, your brother sounds like a good man to me. She said, no self-respecting black man would do that. We did 3 days with this group, and at the end, she said, I've really come to respect my brother. She said he's kind, he's loving, he's unique. She says, yeah, he does wear sandals with socks, but he's comfortable doing that. And she said, who am I to judge him? He's choosing to live his life the way he wants to live his life. And she said, he's actually a really good man. And she said, I love my brother. It's such an interesting thing when we start to realize that everybody we meet is a character we make up for them in our own mind. Whoever you think I am, I will appear to you as that. The nature of separate reality doesn't stop at certain points or with certain subjects. It is a full-on, entirely 100% of the time thing going on. This is why who I find attractive, you probably might not. Or vice versa. You know, who I may find a bit irritating, getting on my tits a bit. You may go, no, Dave, I actually found them really nice. I was really interested in what they had to say. Why? Because you meet a different person. We can both meet the same person. We can both sit down with the same person. You and I could be on a, what's it called? An interviewing panel, interviewing for people to have a job. Perhaps Wim and Dave sit down on an interviewing panel. Let's chuck a few more people in there, Wendy and Jerry and Helen, and let's all sit us down and we're gonna interview this person. Wim's like, I like them. They're nice. I think we should have them. I'm like, oh, bloody hell. Wim likes everybody. I don't like them. No, you can't say that about Wim. Wim doesn't like everybody. That's not what I see. The way I see Wim. And in all honesty, I thought that person was so-so for the job. We'd all meet somebody different because everybody we meet is a character within our own mind. I often say, I'm so grateful that my father doesn't see me in the way that my mother sees. No, I'm so grateful that my father doesn't see me in the way that he sees my mother. That's because I'm sick. Everybody we meet, your sister is a character within your mind. We make up characters and assign them for people. I had this experience with my dad. When I really saw through my character of who I thought my dad was to the truth of what was going on in the moment, rather than meeting him with this, oh, you're always like this. This is who you are. Why are you always that? And all of a sudden I met him in the moment and that character died. My father didn't drop down dead, but my father died to me and I met a new man. I met a different man. Why? Because the man who I met was my new creation of my father with deeper understanding about how he was actually feeling in that moment, as opposed to who I thought he was. I could hear him, going back to that listening thing. I wasn't listening to my own prejudices. I was hearing him. And mine and my father's relationship changed. Really grateful to that. But I changed. The thing that changed was my mind, was my thought. I had a new perspective. It wasn't my father that was the problem. It was my perspective that was causing me suffering. It was who I thought he was. I learned something that day, and I try to be aware of that now when I meet people. Try not to make a character up for this person. Just be present with them and love them best you can. So I choose to live my life. But I understand I have choice. I could also create a massive story, buy into it, believe it, and live it, and condemn everybody. Because if I spend enough time with everybody on earth, I'm going to find things that I don't particularly like. But it's not them, it's me. It's aspects of my ego. It's my beliefs that I'm experiencing. I don't experience anything other than my own thought. The story I create about those people. We often have people coming to us saying, I want you to fix my husband, fix my wife. And then they wake up and realize, oh, I was doing it to myself. That's how we have nice relationships, is when we start to take responsibility for our own experience of life. When we start to understand that any feeling we have is not created outside of us, it's created from within our own consciousness via the way we are perceiving something. How can you have a perception? A perception is a creation of thought. How you think it appears. So it's beautiful that you've started to feel like there could be some movement in that. That's how fixed it all is, Wim. That's how solid it is. If it was true and solid, there could be no movement. It'd be like trying to move Mount Everest. There's a saying in the book of Thomas, when you make the two into one, you will say to the mountain, move, and the mountain must move. Now, I would interpret that as the mountains are all our problems in the world that we see in our lives, the unsurmountable problems. But when we realize that the feeling of the problem is coming from thought, the two, feeling, thought, become one. Oh, fuck, it's one action. As I think, so I feel. All of a sudden, the mountain disappears because you realize that the mountain was actually a perspective of the mind. I often use the example, I wasn't particularly good at mathematics. And my extra tuition teacher would write down an equation, and I would be stood there going, is it this? And he'd go, no, Dave. No, it's like this. No problem to him. He'd rattle it off. Russ used to rattle it off. And I'd go, is it that, Russ? And he'd go, no, I've shown you 2 or 3 times now, Dave, it's this. To Russ, it was no problem. To me, it was a mountain. We're both looking at the same equation on the same piece of paper, but 2 totally different experiences. If the experience was really the equation, Russ has to feel it as well. Same thing I feel. If your sister was truly as you think she is, there wouldn't be people who like her, want to be friends with her. And I'm guessing she probably has got a friend. There'll be people in the world who see her differently. It's just interesting to notice. That's all.
There is something that's coming up when you're talking, like, I imagine there's like physical abuse going on in a family. Like if my sister was like literally hitting me physically, or my father doing that, then you would say, okay, you don't have to stay there. I mean, even though you create all the pain yourself, it's just, yeah, it would be stupid to stay. But there are like psychological ways sometimes that people, just the way other people see you can hurt you in a way, just like almost like physical pain, like with things like narcissism, or if people just don't value you, are not interested in your opinion, or just not interested in your life, then spending time with them
Yeah,
can
there's
hurt.
many people who are not interested in my opinion. but that's all right. You know, and there's many
Yeah.
people who don't agree with what I say, but it doesn't hurt me. I remember being in a school and this kid saying similar kind of thing. She said, but you know, when people say mean things to you and are horrible to you, then you know it does hurt, Dave. And I said, all right, come on, let's try it out. And this feisty little kid, I said, who wants to go at me? And this feisty little kid went, me. All right, don't swear. Your teacher's in the class. These were like 11-year-olds. Your teacher's in the class. Go on, give me your worst. And this kid was like, you're stupid. Your glasses make you look stupid. And these other kids are going, can I ever go? Can I ever go? I was like, go on then, like, nah, 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 chucking all these insults at me. And I just laughed at them. And this kid was blown away. She was like, does that not hurt? I'm like, no, it doesn't hurt. It was funny that they were trying the best to hurt me, but it couldn't hurt me. It could if I allowed it to, if I thought, oh, perhaps there's some truth in that. Perhaps I am stupid. I'd have had to think that. I'd have had to create that experience. Then this one kid says to me, I'll kill your dog. I was like, that's the best one yet. Good effort, son. I'll give you, take my hat off to you, mate. I used to Rusty, my little dog. But no, it truly is. It is truly, Wim. It truly is. And please don't take my word for it. I want you to explore it. I want you to explore it. How can you have an experience? How could you possibly create a perspective on anything
I do
without?
believe that it's 100% my creation. Even if someone beats me to death, it's like I'm creating that experience of even the physical hurt and everything. It's like it's my creation.
Yes.
Someone, but in a way that's like, or maybe not always helpful to look in the direction. I mean, if someone is getting physically abused, I mean, it's not really useful to say, yeah, you create all the pain yourself.
No. And this
And
is this is the
keep
other
moving.
thing about thought. It's like we are given that we are endowed with this infinite gift of thought. We can either use it proactively for us to create a beautiful life, or we can use it destructively against ourselves and other people. The both polarities exist within the same force. So no, if somebody is suffering and being beaten by, I don't know, a partner or anything like that, I would say use your God-given gift of intelligence and figure out what you think you should do. And then live your life according to it. Be moved by it. Be moved by your intelligence. Be moved by your wisdom. Be moved by useful thinking. Don't just sit there and go, oh, this is just a thought. That would be ridiculous. But the experience in and of itself, like we had a client the other day said, what? So if you were in Gaza, what use is it to know that? What would you say to somebody who is whose child's just been blown up? What would you say to them about thought? I said nothing. I wouldn't say anything to them about thought. Be the last thing I would do. They said, well, how could it help them? I said, it wouldn't help them. But it wouldn't change the fact that how they experience life is coming from consciousness thought. That cannot change. However, if I was faced with the situation of finding myself in Gaza and coming across a woman who's lost their children, I think I would just show her love and do anything I could to help make her life easier. That's what makes sense to me. This isn't a therapy. This is not a therapy. This is not a technique. This is pointing to the fundamental nature of how we experience life, whether it be what we perceive to be positive or perceive to be negative. They're both the same thing. There really isn't that division. The division exists in our mind, the same as any division throughout the entire universe only exists as a thought. The division between ourselves as races, as separate people, as separate entities, as separate from nature, any of it is a thought. The separation doesn't actually exist. It's an illusion. So starting to see, all we're pointing to is we're helping people break down the illusions of reality. One of the most fundamental illusions of reality is we think our reality is the truth.
I just wanted to say something. I don't know if I'm going to be able to without Lucia flooding the bathroom. I've left her washing her hands at the moment. I think it can be really easy to hear this and think, oh, well, if it's just thought, then I'm creating it. And there's something about it. You start to see the absolute innocence in yourself in terms of how you create reality. You start to see that in other people. So it's not that you necessarily want to spend time with someone who's continually like trying to put you down, but you start to see where they're lost in thought, they're lost in illusion. And if they're feeling the need to be horrible to another human being, they're not feeling all right. What you then choose to do is up to you. But I think there's something that happens when we start feeling empowered and less victimized. The way that we show up with those kind of people changes. Our tolerance levels can go down and the way that we interact is different, but we've become maybe more responsive rather than reactive. We probably do move away from certain relationships and move more towards other relationships. But you can see that ability to 2 seconds. That ability to have wisdom in the moment to know how to deal with life exists for us. And the more we see that this thought created reality, this thought created experience, that's true for us and it's true for everyone. You start to see everyone's doing the very best they can given how they think and see the world in the same way we do. It gives us way more space to have a new thought about that person. And if we just think they're an asshole to me, they're like this to me, I can't be around them, I feel so awful when I'm around them. You start to see, well, you see that they're coming from their reality, and that actually the only place you have any movement and say is within your own. But it's not saying stay in an abusive relationship or stay in an abusive situation. It's just saying start to notice. And there's actually, I'll try and find it and put it on the link tomorrow, but there's a beautiful talk that Chip Chipman gave about his relationship with his dad, who had been, I think, abusive and was an alcoholic and growing up. It's a shift that happened for him because he was kind of his exception to this for a long time. He'd been around Sid many years before he had a shift in feeling and the relationship changed. But it's knowing that we're built of wisdom and we're built of intelligence, and that if we're stuck in one way of seeing something or someone, we don't allow the movement. And I liked the beginning of when you started speaking, when you said something's feeling like there's a potential that maybe it's not true, and there's just a bit of space around it. It's like just stay with that and see what occurs. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, potential for something new or something new. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's cool. It's, you know, I'll tell a story I've told many times, but one of the deepest seated beliefs in the world, I believe, is the black-white division in South Africa. When you look at the world, there's not many more deep-seated kind of, what's the word, generational hand-me-down beliefs than the black-white divide in South Africa. And we've been out in South Africa numerous times working, and we've seen it left, right, and center from both sides. And I remember, forgive me anybody who's heard this story, but it just showed me something about how everything can change in a moment. That's how stuck we are. It can all change in a moment. And I was working in a soup kitchen. This big black man came in, and he had his beaten up face, and he was built like a brick shit house. He was about 6'4". He towered. I'm 6 foot, and he towered over me. He'd be bigger than me. He was a big lad, like must have been about 17, 18 stone. Didn't look unfit. And he walked in, and I took one look at him and thought, who the hell would tackle you? And I went to take his bags, and he held his bags back from me. And it was late in. There was 300 people in this soup kitchen of homeless people. 2 of them were white, the rest were all black. And there was varying gangs sat together in different groups, kind of wouldn't take their eyes off each other. So in certain parts of the room, it was like you could see that they were kind of nervous and they were kind of waiting for it. Please don't kick off. And in other parts, there were just people playing cards and having a laugh, and some of them were having shaves and stuff. It was a really cool experience. But this man stood there, and I said to him, I said, "Do you mind me asking what happened to your face?" And he said, "I was beaten." I said, "Wow." I said, "You were beaten?" I said, "Yeah." He said, 4 men came in the park and beat me and took my things whilst I was asleep. And I said, "Whoa." I said, "That must have been terrifying." And he said, "Afraid?" Looked down at me and went, "Afraid?" I said, "Yeah, I think I probably will be afraid." He said, "I will never be afraid of my brothers." He said, "The only person I need to be afraid of is you." And I just stood there gobsmacked, like, whoa. And I said to him, I said, "Why? What have I done?" It's all that I could kind of muster up at the time. "What have I done wrong?" And he said, "You, white man, you suppress us. You suppress us. You suppress me." I say this because I don't think it's what you should do. It's just what happened that moment. This is what came to me in that moment. I just said to him, "I'm so sorry, I don't see what you're saying." I said, "The suppression," I said, "can you please show me it?" I said, "Because I don't want you to experience that anymore." He said, "What do you mean, can I show you it?" I said, "You're going to have to show me it." "What do you mean, show you it?" I said, "You're going to have to point to it, please. Please, can you point to it? Point to this suppression. Can you point to it, please?" "How do you mean, can I point to it?" He's getting a bit irate. And I said, "You're going to have to touch it. The suppression you feel, you're going to have to touch it. Please show me it." I said, "Because I want to do something about it." And he started looking like, "What are you talking about?" It was then that I got to have a conversation with him about what I'd discovered and about life, and how reality is a creation of our consciousness. Creation is our spiritual gift to create reality, to come into this world and create reality, but we don't know it. We get to create any experience. We can create any experience and live it as though it's true and real. That's our gift as spiritual beings. And I spoke to him for about 20 minutes, it turned out. I have no idea. I thought it was about 5, but Jenny said no, it was about 20 minutes. And this man suddenly burst into tears. And he looked down at me and he went, "My brother, you've set me free. My brother, you've set me free," he said. And he flopped back into this chair, and I sat down in front of him, and he leant forward and he hugged me, and I cried, and we just cried. And we fell in love with one another. To this day, I feel, as I speak of him, I feel the love. I feel such a tingle all over my body of love for that man. No idea where he's at now. I fell in love with that man, and that man fell in love with me. And he just said, "My brother, you've set me free." And I just looked at him and said, "No, brother," I said, "you set you free. I can't do that. I can't set anybody free. We set ourselves free. The freedom already exists. The only thing that's creating the prison is our beliefs, our thoughts, that we think are the truth." In that moment, bang! His racism died towards me. His hatred towards me died. He smiled, he's walked around. He's the last person to leave that room. And he walked around like his whole world had been turned upside down. He kind of didn't know where to walk. He was blown apart. I'm not saying that to kind of big me up by any means. What I'm pointing out is the power of understanding where our experience comes from is enough to break even the most deep-seated belief on the planet. And then we went outside and our friend was crying her eyes out and she said, look at the problem here. It's too big. It's too big. The problem South Africa faces is too big. This is only scratching the surface of the homelessness of South Africa. And Jen and I sat down to her next to her and said, it's not. The problem South Africa faces isn't big at all. I said, yeah, it looks big if you've got to look at it from the external point of view, the material point of view. You've got to get equal housing, equality in politics, the redistribution of land, redistribution of wealth, all that stuff, equal like housing, whatever, and work. I said, yeah, it looks enormous. I said, but if people could understand that South Africa is only the way it is because of the way people think about one another, and they learn to think differently about one another, I said, South Africa will change. Because it's only held together by thought. The discrimination, the division is only held together by thought. It only exists in the mind of the individual who perceives it. That's the magnitude of the conversation we're having. We can change the world with it. If people start to realize and wake up and realize they're living in a dream, the dream they think is real. Wake up. Wake up and realize we're living in a dream state reality. Has to be. What else could it possibly be? Why do I dream a different reality to Jenny? To my sister who's got the same genetic stock as me? This is what the mystics were pointing to, the dream of life. Look within. Stop looking out. Start to look within. Same thing. Same thing we're talking about. It's logic. It's the fundamental. It's the fundamental logic. This won't add anything to anyone. This won't make anybody better. This won't heal anything. Because nobody's broken. Nobody's ill. Everybody's already all right. We just keep on dreaming scary dreams. We just keep on dreaming hurtful dreams. We just keep recreating the same old because we don't know we actually have a choice. We actually have an option. I'm not telling anybody to positively think. I'm not saying positive think. Positive think people are quite difficult to be around in my world. I don't like being around positive people. Positive all the time, gotta be positive. No, I'm not talking that because that's just annoying. But to be able to have the grace of having all experience, to me, the nature of true well-being is to allow ourselves to feel anything, to truly feel, to have no prejudice about right or wrong thoughts and feelings. Understand you cannot be broken. No feeling will ever break you. No thought has any power. No thought has any power. We hold the power. That's why somebody can have a suicide thought and come and see us about it. They didn't act on it. Why didn't they act on it? Because the thought in and of itself didn't have any power. That's why people can break addictions. They still think about drugs, drink, alcohol, cigarettes or whatever, sex, whatever, but they don't act on it because the thought in and of itself doesn't actually have any power. The power lies in the beingness of life, ourselves. All right, let's call it an evening. I know I've pitched it up against a bad day tomorrow with the England football final. But anybody who can make it, it'd be so wonderful to see you. If you found this useful, please consider making a donation. Again, I've put the donation information in the chat at the right at the very top. If you found this useful, please consider making a donation. It's how Jen and I make our money. But we are back again tomorrow. We hope you found this valuable. We hope that you take something from this. One of the things I would say is, don't worry about if it's got all the conflicting ideas in your head. Don't worry about any of that. It's fine. If for any reason, though, you do happen to feel like uplifted, or you feel like there's something truthful being spoken, but you can't quite put your finger on it, cool. Anybody who has a true insight could never really talk about it. It will be a shift in consciousness. And I would ask that person, what did you do? And they'll go, nothing. I did nothing. Did you change so much? People ask. I don't know. But I did nothing. This is not an effortful thing. This is a be as lazy as you like thing. Please. I mean that. There is nothing to do. We're all already it. Just pretending we're not. We are all already what we are searching for. Just because we are creators, we have the capacity to create the impression we're not. So is everybody else, by the way. All right. I'm sending everybody so much love, and thank you all for staying on. I know we've run over by 20 minutes, but just sending everybody so much love. If you can make it tomorrow, it'd be wonderful. Same time, same link. And yeah, loads of love and God bless.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Jen.
Welcome. You're welcome, mate. Thank you, Jerry.